Okay, this one is the project management workshop using the PMI standards towards PMP certification. I specifically stated here the PMP certification because the one of the goal here is to really introduce the participants on what are the things we need to prepare if we want to really pursue the project management professional certification exams. So one of the introduction will be discussing those guidelines given by PMI or the Project Management Institute. Okay, I think I was given Sir VP already gave my introduction. So I'm more on, unlike you guys, I'm more on the engineering side, but I'm doing partly project management tasks since 2013. That's why I became interested with project management professional exam, and I'm currently the BIM manager of Asia Projects Engineering. So most of the goals that was set is to automate not only the 3D modeling but mostly to automate um, procedures. So we're currently working on automation of the safety, especially the COVID case is very rampant in the construction industry, especially the site. So that's part of my goal. That's why I'm also very interested to learn from you guys from ICPEP. Okay. Um, sorry, I just got this one from my previous slide. So I'm currently 14 years being a professional civil engineer, and again, I'm really interested to learn as well the the programs provided by ICPEP Singapore. Okay, for this presentation or this short workshop, we're going to have introduction to PMP certification exam. I will be covering also the exam domains. Majority of this, I really hope also nobody sleeps. So many of these are wordings, not much photo, but we'll try to make it as lively as possible. So one of the main topic for today is the PM Book Guide 6 edition, focusing on the process flows. PM Book is a project management book of knowledge. This is published by PMI. Then if our time permits, we'll be also covering the project management fundamentals. Majority of this, if you were able to attend I think it's November, around November last year, um, through the invitation of Dr. Ryan as well, we were able to conduct the primer on project management. So most of those will be reviewing in the management fundamentals. Okay, so for the introduction, we have here the website of PMI. So we'll try to connect, hopefully it will, to show you. So again, this course is more on introducing the PMP examinations, meaning the guidelines and the guides and the books will be utilizing. Also, the processes are mainly from PMI. So later on, we will discuss also some of the PM book, the contents, and as we progress on the next sessions, we will be discussing them um, fully or more detail with corresponding workshops and group activities. Okay, so let me stop sharing and I will share the PMI just to give you an overview of the PMI website. Okay, so now, again, it is included in the link in our handouts. So we could access here. So this website, they have all the information regarding the exams provided by PMI. So one of them is PMP. We also have um, CAPM, or the Certified Associate. Sometimes if our credentials or the number of hours required does not meet the PMP requirement, then they are advising us to get the CAPM first. So this one, I hope you can see it in the screen. So CAPM, because later on we will discussing also the requirements, how to take the exam. So how to apply and how to take. So this is PMP is around worldwide. It's more than 1 million certified PMP already. Many of those, actually more than half, are not really project managers, but contributing members of a project management team. Like ourselves, although we're still engineers, project engineers, or leads, although our title is not really project managers, we oftentimes do a lot of project management tasks. So that's why they are allowing us to take this one. So from this website, we have the steps on how to apply. We have the exam proper. So currently, it is sixth edition of the PM book, sixth edition. But starting January, they are trying to change again into the seventh edition. So when I joined the formal course last 2018 or 2017, it is still fifth edition. Now we're moving to, until this year, December 31, 2020, still sixth edition. Then starting January, we're moving to seventh edition. There's a lot of major changes so far. So if you are targeting, so that's one of the goal of this workshop. It is to introduce um, the content of the sixth edition. Then if ever the team decides to proceed or to continue the study and to take eventually take the exam, then at least it is more on reinforcement. Reinforcement meaning just applying the changes from the sixth edition to the seventh. So again, based on our timeline, we could not really cover the agile, but the client and I are planning to have it on a separate workshop. So later on, after we finish this. Okay, so to have a better understanding also, so from this website, we have the handbook, we have the requirements. So we'll be discussing them uh, in today's lecture. Okay, so at least we're just showing you. So we have the references here. We can download this one, but I don't want to spend much time on downloading time. I think I already have that one saved. So let me go back to the slide. So this is the content of the PMI website. We can have more. You can explore this one after today's lecture. Many of these have free downloadable materials. But if you're a member of PMI, then definitely you have a library of downloadables, free downloadables. Okay, let me go back to our presentation slide. Okay, so that is the PMI website, or the site that I have presented here, concerning the guides to take the PMP. Now let's have a look at the professional handbook. So, and later on we will go in detail on what is the content. I hope it's still open. Okay, so this is one of the material you can download in that website, from that website. This contains the requirements. So this one we're going to discuss quickly. So this is, you can see from this document the certification process. So you have the application submission of 90 days. You have the complete review. And if you get lucky, because sometimes they do random audit, if you get picked, then you need to submit the proof, not only your experience, your records, but also that you were able to complete the 35 contact hours that they require. So that is, the 35 contact hour is more on the formal course. Last time we took that one in NTUC. Then that is if you get very lucky to be audited. So you really need to submit your requirements. I mean, you need to send it by post, the physical document. Then for the application payment, so we're going to have that one. Then the examination eligibility, certification cycle, credential maintenance of 3 years. So once you get the schedule of the exam, actually it's done virtually until December. So it is a proctored exam, but done virtually. It is, I think later we will be discussing that one in details. So this is the procedure. Then later we will be discussing also
Excuse me lang
the.
po. Sir, pwede ba natin enlarge yung ano to, yung font? Kasi parang maliit.
Sorry sir. Okay.
Oo.
Anyway, bibigay naman natin to yung documents.
Okay.
Go over lang tayo.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So, okay, so sorry about that. And because we're going to share this one, it is a free download, so we'll have this guide. So passing lang, we will just discuss this in passing. So again, you have the 90 days application for engineers, senior engineers, and leads, and we are not project managers. We cannot claim these PM hours because there's a lot of activities or processes that many members are doing that could share in the PM task. Okay, so also indicated in this document, we'll just go over quickly for us to get an idea. So if we have most of this, again, for the entire year because of the COVID pandemic, all of these are online examinations. Sometimes it is, we could say it is advantageous, but sometimes, of course, many doesn't prefer as well because it's going to be a 4-hour exam. Then if your internet connection fluctuates, that's automatically disconnected. So if they will not allow to reconnect or something. So anyway, for the pricing, if you're a non-member of PMI, you're going to pay, this is in US dollars, you're going to pay 555. And if you're a member, you'll get to pay 405. So you save 150. But the examination, I mean the membership fee of PMI, I think it's 130 or something. So you get to save $20 if you're a member. $20 plus a lot of downloads. Okay, so I think that's the magic number we should remember when if we're planning to take the exam. For members is 405 and 555 for non-members. Okay, so anyway, this document will be given to everyone, part of the slide, so we will not go through on all the content. Okay, this one, as tabulated, we have, later on we have, I think this document also indicates the breakdown, but we have a 200 questions, multiple choice, 200 questions, multiple choice. You're going to sit in for 4 hours, but with the 200 questions, 175 is only the scored one, meaning they have 25 unscored. If you got it right or got it wrong, it will not affect your score. So that's the tricky part. 25 questions unscored. Then, okay, here's the breakdown. That's why we're going to discuss the domains, the project management domains, since these are the guidelines given by PMI for the PMP. So we have the domain and we have the corresponding percentage. Okay, for the initiation, we have 13%, planning 24%. So these are the magic numbers that we need to to think about when we review. So for execution of the project, it is 31%. For monitoring and control, 25%, and closing, 7%. So later on, we will be discussing this in breakdown. Okay, let me check the time. I hope everyone is still awake. So these are just intro on this document. Okay. Now let me go back to my slide. So this document we can review, you can download it and review if you're really interested. Okay. Then we have the exam outline. So this is another document. Earlier, we have an idea already of how many questions or how many percentage from initiation, from execution, planning, until closing. So this one will give us the breakdown, this document. I think I have opened this one already. Don't worry, guys. We have a coffee break, coffee break in a while. So if you get sleepy, you may prepare your coffee. Okay. So again, this is what I'm sharing now is the second document that we can download. This is the content outline of the exam. Why we are discussing this? Again, one of the goal, aside from applying it in our daily task, we're trying to encourage. We're going to form a team for the exam. So hopefully, after this one, you'll get a better understanding of what you're going to face when we're taking the exam. So again, initiating 13, planning 24, executing 31, monitoring and control 25, and closing. So if you notice, more or less, planning and monitoring have the same percentage. The highest one is executing the project. So a lot of items are under the executing. Okay, so for this one, we'll go, let's check the time if we could still, anyway, these are the overview of the domains. So since we're going to have 13% for initiating, these are the tasks expected from the takers to know so that we could answer the questions. So we need to perform assessment based on available information. So identify the key deliverables because this is initiating. Also, we need to perform the stakeholder analysis using the appropriate tools and techniques. We call it ITTO, the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. Okay, then we're also expected to identify, to prepare for initiating the risks and assumptions constraints. Participate in development of the project's charter. Okay, part of this workshop, we're going to prepare our own project charter. At least just for us to have a better grasp of what is project charter. Then we need to obtain project charter approval. Another task is conduct the benefit analysis of relevant stakeholders. So basically, the initiating part is more on the project charter, the definition of the project, and also the engagement of or identifying our stakeholders. So later on, we will have, I will be showing you the entire process in the PM book. So later, that is part two. So we'll just go over this as quickly as we can. Then later on, we will be absorbing more. So for planning, 24%, we have this task: review the detailed requirements and constraints, develop the scope management plan. Task number 3 is the cost management plan. So we're planning here. So we have the scope, we have the cost, then we will have the schedule. Then after that, we're going to have the resources management. Another task is communication management. So all the plans we're going to have. Next, we're going to have also the procurement management and quality management, change plan management, risk management. So a lot under planning because we need to cover all of this before we start our project or proceed with the execution. Another task is the project management plan for the relevant stakeholders. Then, of course, kickoff meeting, then communicating. So this one is managing the communication lines. Another task we need to get a grasp on when we're going to study here is the stakeholder management plans. Then these are the key skills. You don't have to enumerate as of this time. It's going to be more detailed. I think this one is third day. Okay, then for the executing or execution of our project, we need to have project resources, the execution based on management plan. So these tasks we will be covering in part so that we will have better understanding of the processes in the PM book. We don't really have to discuss right now. This will take up so much of our time. So at least we know that for the 31%, we have 7 tasks to memorize or to be very, very familiar with. And we have the knowledge skills. So again, this document will be given to the participants. This is downloadable from PMI website. So we can really read and visualize on how we're going to prepare for the exam. And the third domain or the fourth domain is the monitoring and control. After we execute the project, we're going to monitor and control. Actually, it goes hand in hand. Later, I will be explained further in the actual discussion of the process flows. So we have this task for the monitoring and control. And later on, we'll be showing you how each task more or less are interrelated or correlates with other tasks. And lastly, for the closing. So a lot of tasks, but this one, 7% only, so a very small percentage of our expected exam. Okay, so this is part of the second document that we could download. Again, this is the breakdown initiating 200 points, 25 not scored. Okay, everyone is still okay? So I forgot our schedule. We're supposed to take a break around 2:20. Okay. At least everyone could take coffee. Okay, let me share again. Go back to the slides. Okay, so we'll be having these 2 documents later. Okay, this one we have covered already when we visited the PMI website. So this is how we're going to apply for the exam. This is the reason why they have this downloadables, so that you could see the requirements, what are the relevant contents of the handbook that they require, and what are the application pointers. So From this page alone, you get the overview of how to get the PMP certification. So once you comply with the requirements, you can schedule your exam. Normally, they reply 1 week to 2 weeks. So this is part of the exam. We already discussed this, what's on the exam and how to pass. You can read this afterwards. Then, of course, you need to maintain. If ever we pass the PMP examinations, we have 3 years to maintain it and renew. So there are guidelines also, guidelines provided for the CPD or PDUs, the continuing education. So they have this one. Sometimes, again, we're given 3 years. So at this stage, we're going to focus on passing the exam. So if you're familiar with the requirements and what is to be taken, or what are the domains and how many percentage, at least we could balance how we allocate our time in reviewing and studying. Okay, let me see. Okay, this one, yeah, already shown there in the document. Similar with this, these are the requirements. So okay, you could take a look at this later. Okay, we have discussed this one also. The unique months, the percentages. So this one we're going to discuss further, the domains. So we are now familiar more or less with how many percentage with the background of taking the PMP exam. So VP Jan, the questions will be afterwards, or if they want to raise, they can raise.
Sir, pwede nila pong i-raise yung question dun sa
Chat
chat
box
natin.
Okay.
Then pwede nating i-answer na lang, sir.
Okay, sige sir. Noted. Meron na ba? may nagtanong na ba?
Wala pa, sir.
Okay, good. Good. Okay, so let's proceed. So we're done with familiarizing, more or less. We know what is the content of the PMI exam. Now, to make the long story short, it is the PMP exam is really based on one book only, the Project Management Book of Knowledge, which is published by PMI also. So considering the transition period, 2017, it is still the 5th edition, then now it's 2020. So more or less every 3 years, they are trying to change the edition. So they're trying to, based on, this is one reason they are incorporating these unscored questions. So sometimes, although this is situational, they have a certain way to incorporate this one on the next edition that they're going to apply. So again, after 3 years, starting next year, it's going to be the 7th edition, more on agile, and a lot of processes will be changed again. But for this course, we will be focusing on the sixth edition. Okay, so next part. So we're done with this. More or less, we already know how to take, the requirements, how many hours we need, how many months of experience we need, and the payment, how much is the fee, and what are the documents we could use as guide. Okay, now let's have an overview of what is the PM book. I think this is very quick. So we could discuss this one before we take a break, because the next part is a bit lengthy, because we will be discussing in brief the entire processes in this 6th edition PM book guide. Okay, so the Guide to Project Management Body of Knowledge, or PM book. It is a generally recognized approach and good practices to project management. These approaches are from PMI because they are the author of, of the PM book. Then we also have the common lexicon of project management terms. So these are the contents. Basically, the PM book have specifically the 6th edition. We have 3 chapters containing the general information like what is a project, how to prepare a project, and also we have the project management terms. So that is on chapter 1 and chapter 2. Then chapter 3, it is added in the 6th edition. The role of a project manager is described. So what are the roles? What are the leadership skills? What are the skills that should be possessed if we are a project manager? So that's the first 3 chapters of this book. Then the rest, we have 13 chapters, so meaning the 10 chapters are covering the 10 knowledge areas. So again, we have 5 processes. We have 5 groups or the domains. These 5 groups are the domains. We have initiation, we have planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So these are the 5 process groups or domains, which was introduced earlier. Also, the 5th edition, we have 47. We have 47 processes. But for the 6th edition, it becomes 49. What happens is we removed 1 from closing, then 2 new processes were added. So it becomes 49. Then it covers the 10 knowledge areas. Later on, we will be having more understanding on this one if we discuss further. So some of the knowledge areas includes scope, schedule management, cost management, risk management. We already mentioned, but later on we will be discussing further. So these are the magic numbers: 5 process groups or domains, 49 processes, 10 knowledge areas. Okay, so these are the content. Okay, I already discussed this. First 3, role of PM, then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So first we have the integration management. Next, we have the scope. We have the schedule management. We have the cost management, quality management, resource management. Oops, it's not included. Okay, so we have 10 knowledge areas. So we have until 13. So after the resource management, we still have the stakeholder management. Okay, I'll add that one in our slide. Stakeholder management, we also have the risk management. Okay, so I think we can have a break. Then later on, we will be discussing a different slide. Okay, so ito na. So earlier, we discussed ano yung nakikita niyo sa screen. I hope mostly nasa laptop. Medyo maliliit yan. Then later on, may kulay na yan. So this is one of the... naka-on ba yung mic? Okay. This is one of the practice for us to memorize the processes. And for this discussion, normally we learn this yung may physical. We have a big printed out, this one printed out better in A0 or A1. Then we have the cutouts of the processes. And also, correspondingly, later you will observe the chapters in the PM book guide is indicated. So at least the purpose of this second part or the goal, the objective is to for us to understand what is the content of the PM book using only this one page presentation. Again, normally we do this with the cutouts so colorful. Hopefully makita because I cannot zoom in anymore. If cannot, I could share the handouts right now for this one. This is part of the review. I mean, if we're going to study for the exam, this is what we usually do. And okay, I think for the entire duration of this day, of our day one, we will be focusing on this. Okay, so this is the PM Book Guide 6th edition processes flow. Again, to better introduce the processes and to better introduce the domains and what are the corresponding processes, this is what we usually do. Okay, let's start. So any project, we usually start it with initiation or initiating. So the first, let me confirm, can you see it? It's quite small, right? But can you still see it? The integration develop project charter.
Pwede
Yes, sir.
lakihan?
Okay, so
I cannot read it, sir. So, pwede siguro show
hindi na
the
lang yan, no?
full screen and then hindi na po pwedeng i-zoom kung ano yung nasa loob ng box. Yan. Yan, ganyan. And then ibalik mo na lang uli into the full view later. So,
yes, so
parang
ito na po
mabasa
yung
lang namin.
pinakamalaki. Kita ba? Ito na po yung maximum. Okay. Okay, thanks. Okay. So any project, we normally start it with the first domain, the initiating. So initiating domain, we begin our project by developing the project charter. So this is, if you notice here on the top left, here, that is the chapter. And this is the first process under integration. So under integration, meaning integration is under chapter 4. The first integration is the development of the project charter. So for this this one, integration, normally it is, if you still recall, I hope you still recall, the one we discussed last year. I think you already forgot, but integration, we usually define it to be the glue that connects all the other processes within that domain. So expectedly, by saying that, we have the 5 domains. Expectedly, we have integration on each of these domains. We have the integration process. So for initiating, the integration process is the development of the project charter. What is a project charter? Later on, we will be expounding on this, hopefully. But to make it, to cite just a simple example, it is similar to a birth certificate or a title or a land title or a house title. So we have a document that simply states that this thing, specifically this project, exists. So that is a project charter. So if we're going to develop this, we need to have information. What is the project about? Sometimes just a 1-page document or 2-page documents. So we are incorporating the basic information. So that is the process number 1, integration or development of project charter. But for initiating, we only have 2 processes. The other one is the identification of stakeholders. So again, if we're going to develop our project charter, we need information from the stakeholders. So within this document, we are indicating who are the clients, who are the project manager, or who is the project manager, and who are the project management team. Basically, we identify and state here the stakeholders. So these are the two documents we need during the initiating domain. Okay. So to proceed, again, we want to highlight that the corresponding chapter in the PM book are located here at the top left. So if you notice, although we are in the initiating domain, we need to go to chapter 4 and chapter 13 so that we can develop our charter by giving it a description and identifying the stakeholders. So these are the two processes in initiating a project. Okay, take note of this arrow. If you notice, we have two arrows, meaning this document are interdependent. So for example, we have identified or we develop our project charter by using the stakeholders information. Then if there's a certain change or a change in the stakeholder, we'll be changing also the charter that we have. Okay, so they are interdependent. Okay, after this, we could proceed with the next domain or the next process group, which is planning. There. So planning. So we already have the initiation of our project. Then we could proceed with planning. So planning is one of the biggest domain. So if you still recall, it is 24% of the examinations. So these are the processes involved inside. So for planning, I want you to observe later the common or the similarities between the processes as we go along. Okay, to start with, again, as I have mentioned earlier, each of these process group or domain are being held together by the integration process. So expectedly, planning, we also have the integration process here. So the first process for planning is 4.2, meaning it is found in chapter 4, integration. The first process is the development of the project management plan. Okay, so this is technically the output, one of the main output of this domain or this process group, the development of the project management plan. So since it is planning, we're going to have our strategy. We're going to formulate our strategy on how we're going to carry out our project based on what is needed or to satisfy the stakeholders. So we have various processes here. So again, to start with, it is with integration or the development of the project management plan. Okay, so what are the processes involved in planning? Oops. So after identifying the integration process, we're going to proceed with the plan scope management. Okay. Again, it is found in chapter 5, which is scope management. The next process is the plan scope management. So in this process, we are basically identifying how to manage our scope and how to how we're going to approach the project for us to deliver what is required by our stakeholders. So technically, scopes are what we need to deliver, whether we need to construct a building, or we need to provide new servers, or we need to provide new applications. So in this process, we're going to identify them based on what is needed by our stakeholders or what is required by them. So we need to plan out we need to strategize how we're going to meet the scope. Okay, so this is plan scope management. Again, for to proceed further, whenever we have this term plan management, so we just ignore this middle word. This is the plan management. You could take note, it is technically like the set of rules or guidelines. So let's just say it is the rule of identifying the scope. Okay, so plan scope management are the rules that we need to follow so that we could meet the scope or the requirement needed by the stakeholders. Okay, next procedure or next process is still in scope. It is the collection of the requirements. Okay, so we plan out. We already strategize how we're going to manage our scopes. So this time we're going to collect. We're going to collect what are these requirements. What are these scope that we need to deliver? Example, example, one of the scope is providing an application. So what are the requirements of the client or the stakeholder? So we need to identify them. So we are collecting requirements based again on the stakeholders' requirements or needs, or what are their specification on this one. So collection of requirements are the work that needs to be done. Okay, so we're required to provide an app. So what are the works to be done, or what are the specification? Is it for health? Is it just simply a game? So we need to identify them. So we are collecting the requirements from the stakeholders. Technically, these are specifications. So for this activity, for us to comply, is we really need to coordinate with the stakeholders. Okay. Then the next, again, under scope, we need to define scope. So we identify them, how we're going to approach work, how are we going to make how are we going to make the project work. Then we collect what are the details, because so that we can strategize better, we need to have what is really needed by the stakeholders. Now this time, we're going to identify them. So we're providing more details on the requirements. So again, why do we need to define? This one is a collective requirement because as we all know, many projects are further divided into, sometimes it is more on discipline, or for example, in a construction project, we have electrical, we have civil, we have architectural requirements. Then when we collect them, we're doing the definition of the scope. So it is more on the collective requirements, what are needed by all the stakeholders involved for this project to work. So it is more on combined requirements. Some of these requirements could be functionality. Some of the requirements could be technical. So again, it is more on the specifications and the details. So once we have collected the requirements in the 5.2, we're going to collate them in a single document. Usually, this is what we call the document, or the the collection of these requirements are the scope statement. We call it scope statement. So example again, for a construction a project, scope statement of all the disciplines involved, including safety or including the fabrication, etc. So same with other projects. So if your projects are further divided into various functionalities, and you also need to comply with the requirements of per discipline level, or sometimes some application would require age level, or depending on the customer and users, then once you gather them, that is this process, the definition of a scope or formulation of the scope statement. Okay, then once we have this one collected, once we have all the scopes or the requirements collected, we're going to proceed with the creation of the work breakdown structure, or the WBS. So again, all items that pertains to the scope are located, or could be found in chapter 5, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. So creation of WBS, it is, I think all of us is familiar. It is like organizational chart. WBS, or work breakdown structures, are like organizational chart. This breaks down the project into manageable pieces of work. So from the scope that we have identified and we have gathered, so from our scope statement here in definition of scope, we're going to prepare packages. So we're going to further break down our project into packages. So we call them WBS package or process package. So we're not yet in detail. We still have other processes to do, but at least we are gradually breaking down or putting the details on our planning on how we're going to approach based on the scope. Okay, so all in all, these 4 processes under planning is going to be contributing to our project management plan. So meaning, once we have covered the scope, basically we have the scope statement and the work breakdown structure, it will be added, or it's going to be integrated in our management plan. So our project management plan have the scope. Okay, next. Again, what are what are other factors we need to consider? Of course, we need to plan out also for the schedule, as indicated in our triple constraints. So we already have the scope, or what we need to deliver. Now we're going to formulate the schedule. So what are the processes? So from this, we have identified the what of the project. Next, we're going to identify the time frame or the timeline. Okay, I hope everyone is still following. So for this next process, we have 6.1, plan, schedule, management. So again, as I have mentioned earlier, disregard the middle word, focus on plan and management. We could say that these are plan and management are considered the rules or the guidelines we need to comply with for the project. But this time, since it is plan, schedule, management, so we are focusing this time on the guidelines or the rules we need to follow for the schedule, the aspect of time. It's like playing. Okay, it's like playing any sport. We cannot do we cannot implement any sports without rules, or you cannot implement the rules if you're already playing. You cannot simply change them and modify anything when you're already playing or you're doing execution. So most of those rules are here in the planning stage. So same with the projects, we are identifying the rules on how we're going to tackle the project in the execution. Okay, so again, we're still in this schedule, the plan schedule management. So plan schedule management, uh, we are referring to the rules for the activity duration. Okay, so we already have the scopes. We already know what we're going to do. So this time, let's set the time frame. Let's set the duration. So when we have the uh, plan schedule management, we could further break down this one into activities. So the next procedure is the identification or the definition of the activities based on the time frame. So define activities, it is in 6.2 under schedule. These are the tasks to deliver the work breakdown structures package. Okay, so from the scope, we already have the work breakdown structures, right? Then using the timeline that we have, we could identify further or we could define further the tasks or the activities we need to finish the packages. So example, one of the package is we need to install a new server. So what are the needed tasks or activities for that one? It's not simply buying, right? Sometimes we need additional parts to. So those are the breakdown of our. We already have the WBS packages. Then when we define the activities, we are already considering the time frame. Okay, meaning we're going to further break it down into the activities that could deliver or that could meet one of the packages of this work breakdown structure, and so on. So this one we consider the time. Next, of course, when we are talking about time or schedule, we need to identify. So we have the activities. We have the activities, but we need to identify the sequence of these activities. So next is the sequence. We have our rules, or these are the timeline that we have. We have identified the activities. Next, we need to prioritize, or we need to identify which one should be done first. Because again, we're dealing with the time or duration. Which of these activities? Okay, all of these activities, when done, we could complete our breakdown structure. But which of these should come first? Because some of these activities or the sub-activities are interdependent. Sometimes activity B could not start from without completing activity A, etc. Okay, so we need to consider that one as well. Considering the time, we need to consider the sequence of activities. Okay, then from this, we already have our sub-activities, we already have the sequence, but what's the next thing we should be doing? From this, we could estimate the durations. Okay, I know this activity, and we already know this one comes first, this one second, third, and so on. So after this, we're going to identify or estimate the durations of each activity. So meaning we're adding up how many hours or how many days, how many man hours or how many man days for us to complete this one. Okay, so that is for estimate activity. So again, I want to point out here, all these arrow are going back and forth, and crisscrossing, meaning these activities, this series of activities are interlinked or interconnected. Because sometimes we define activities, we already know the sequence, then we provide the duration, then suddenly, sometimes we find, we notice, or maybe another activity is needed for us to comply with RWBS. So if there's a change in activities, there's change of sequences as well. So some of these are interrelated, could affect one and each other. Okay, but this simply shows that this is not a rigid flow, meaning this is not a rigid flow. These numbering are simply guides. So we have 6.1, 6.2, 3, 4. But it means that any one of these could come back to this one could come back to this. This is like more or less similar to Agile one. It is not fixed, it is not rigid, and it is flowing. So it refers to the fluidity of these processes or flow. So project processes, meaning we are flexible enough. If we have changes, if we need to change something, we could provide or apply the changes to the succeeding activities or processes. Okay, so from these four schedule processes, we could come up with another document. So again, for the scope, we were able to come up with a scope statement and the work breakdown structure. For the schedule, it is development of the schedule. I believe all of us were able to see, even any company we joined or how long our experiences are, we were able to see more or less a project schedule. So some of these are Gantt charts, some of these are generated from MS projects, some of these are generated from Primavera, or even sometimes it is prepared in Excel. But to make this long story short, for the schedule, it is simply a visualization of the project duration. So from this, we were able to identify the packages in the work breakdown structures. We were able to identify the activities and the duration and the sequence. We already identified them. Then we could create our project schedule. It is the fifth process in the schedule under planning, which is the development of the project schedule. Again, it is more of a visualization of how a project is placed within time. So we have the duration, we have this activity A, activity B, etc. So whether it is a Gantt chart, whether it is formulated from other softwares. So it is, as project managers, it is one quick way for us to visualize how our project is going to start, how it's going to end, which project or which activity is going to come first, second, third, and so on. Okay, so in short, this group of activities in planning are under schedule. So these are under the schedule, or we are identifying here how much time is needed to perform everything. How much time is needed to perform everything or anything to deliver the scope that we have identified here. Okay, I hope everyone could still follow. Then, again, this group of activities is contributing to the development of our project management plan. So we already catered for the scope, we already catered for the time or the schedule. Next, we'll proceed to another group of processes that will be contributing to our project management plan. This time, we will be covering the budget or the cost. Okay, so what are the processes involved in planning out our cost or budget. So again, just to highlight, all of these arrows are moving back and forth. So meaning there's fluidity, there's agility in our project management application. So actually, the one that I'm discussing, the way we discuss it right now, it is based on the actual one we're using on project, and we could apply. So meaning we are not really rigid. We're not frigid. We are trying to be fluid and more flexible. Okay. Okay. For the first task or first process under planning domain for cost is, of course, plan cost management. So you can see already we have the plan scope, plan schedule management, plan cost management. So this time, if it is, let's say, if we all agree that we call the plan plus management are the rules we're going to follow during execution or project execution. So meaning the first process we're going to do here in the cost is the rules. We need to know what are the rules we need to follow. We need to identify the rules we need to follow to play with our project in terms of the cost. Okay, so plan cost management, these are identification of budget, but technically these are, we need to identify at this stage. If we are planning the cost management, we need to identify here specifically who's going to be the authority. Who's going to be the authority when it comes to money matters or finances when we start or when we execute our projects. For example, is it only the finance manager, or does PM have any say on the costing? So we need to identify it as early as this one. So it is more on who's going to approve what, or who's going to be the authority when changes are affecting our budget or changes are affecting our cost during the implementation or the execution. So we need to identify this one. Okay, that's clear. Okay, next, another process after we were able to identify, another process is the estimation of costs. Okay, so we already have our scope, right? Then we were able to formulate our schedule. With our schedule, we have already the sequences of the activities and corresponding durations. Now from this, we could already estimate the cost, whether it is spending on the resources, spending on machinery rental, etc., or purchasing. We could really estimate already because we have identified already the activities and the schedule, more or less. That's why it is more on estimating. So these are based on the scope plus activities. We could formulate the estimated cost. Okay, then third activity for cost under planning domain. If we already have the estimated cost, then we could formulate or determine our budget. So we're just simply putting dollar sign or peso sign or whatever currency on the activity that we need to do to comply with what is required or what are the scopes, because we already have the date or the schedule, we already have what we need to do, and we already have the estimate of the cost. Then we could formulate or determine our project budget. Again, this is a general application. Any project, whether small or big, we could apply this flow. And again, with all these arrows pointing up and down, left and right. So within this group, it is fluid. So any changes on the plan cost, actually plan cost is more on the authority who's going to approve what. But for these two example, the estimated cost. If there's a changes in the activity, maybe our estimates change, and definitely it will be affecting our budget or vice versa. So example, we have submitted the estimate, we have formulated the budget, but the budget is beyond what is expected. So sometimes we do is we massage or we made some changes on the estimate. And in turn, it will be affecting also the scope of activities or the time, right? Because as we all know, these two are interdependent. Okay, so again, once we have this cost, these processes for cost, and we already have the budget, we could add that one to our project management plan under the cost. Okay, so we already covered the scope, schedule, cost. Next, to move forward, another activity or process we need to do to complete our project management plan is the quality management plan. Okay. So this cost is under chapter 7. Next, quality is chapter 8 in the PM book. So plan quality management. Okay, without explaining further, as what we explained earlier, saying that plan and management is equal to the rules, for example, rule of the game, then it simply shows that the plan quality management is or the rules we need to comply with for quality. So what is quality? I think we are all familiar. Actually, we could define quality on a different terms. So, but basically, quality is generally defined the standard that is set by our client or set by our end user or our stakeholders. So if they set this one to a certain level and we met those expectations of the requirements, then we could say that we met the quality that they require. So that is one definition. So as project managers or part of the project management team, this is one of the activities we need to do during planning. We need to identify what is going to be our threshold. What is going to be our line, our border to identify what are really the quality. Is it below or above quality? Because we have already set the standards for the project. So again, this is we have a lot of activities for this. In the actual company scenario and projects, we have the quality management system that is part of this one. So that is for documentation. So sometimes on fabrication also we have also our quality plans. So as long as we set these guidelines, these limits, these standards, and later on we're going to execute our project, we're going to have something to look up to. We have something to refer to if we really complied or we really did well on our project. So that's why we are formulating these quality management plans. Okay? So again, these are rules for the quality and what are the deliverables and what are the expectations in terms of quality. So it depends on the project, it depends on the client, it depends on the company. But anyway, we always approve or we always do approvals, meaning it is a consensus document that all are agreeable or all agrees that this is going to be the standard we're going to expect during the project execution. Okay, so again, our project plan quality management is going to be contributing to our project management plan. Okay, that is chapter 8. Next, we have another set of processes, this time dealing with resources. So we covered scope, budget, time, plan, or quality. Next, we're going to deal with the resources. So for this, we have two processes. So for resources, it is under Chapter 9 of the Handbook guide. The first process is under resources is plan resource management. So again, what are the rules or the guides we need to follow for resources? So initially, although I only read the 5th edition and the 6th edition, the older versions, including the 5th, is this one is only under human resource, so specifically human resource. So it means they're only dealing with manpower. But this time in the 6th edition, it was changed. It was modified into resources, meaning not only the human capital, or not only the manpower, but also the resources, including the physical or the material resources that we need for our project. So for this, we're going to plan out how we're going to manage our resources. So we have 2 activities for resources. This is one. The next one is, sorry. The next one is estimating the activity resources. So again, going back to planning out the resources, for this process, we need to identify if we're going to hire new staff, if we're going to identify, we need to identify if we're going to hire new staff or simply pull some of the staff on other projects and use it on this existing one or this new one. That is for the manpower aspect. Or sometimes we need to consider, can we build, or can we make our own, or we need to purchase? So those are in the questions we need to answer for this one, the planning of the resource management. Then once we have this identified, how we're going to do with the resources, then we could estimate the activity of the resources. Estimating activity of the resources is simply related to the activities we have here. Remember, we have identified the activities, and sometimes it will entail additional manpower, most of the time actually. So this is more on estimation of the resources we need so that these activities could be accomplished. So we need to identify it here. So it means, okay, for the resources, for the estimation of resources, these are duration would be based on the resources. So again, as what I have mentioned earlier, some of the activities, if we added more manpower, we are expecting result at a lesser time. Meaning, more manpower we have, expectedly, we could accomplish more work, or we could strike out these activities at a shorter period of time or at a shorter duration, and vice versa. Sometimes, addition of machineries, for example, on other projects, specifically in construction, addition of these machineries could also help lessen the duration of these activities. So, with that said, I want to highlight these two. Okay. Notice the flower here, the sunflower. So these two means these two are interrelated. The schedule of estimation of the activity duration and the estimation of the activity resources goes hand in hand. We could apply that one in your project as well. You will notice some of your staff could be working on this specific task quite a long time. But if you added one more, then you could accomplish that one in a shorter period of time. So again, these two, sometimes they call this twin activities or related activities. So this bro 6.4 and 9.2. So just good to note. Okay, proceeding. To proceed again, these resource processes are contributing also in our project management plan. So what's the next process? The next process for planning is communications. So we have 9.1 and 9 is resources. Chapter 10 deals with communications. I hope everyone is still okay. If I'm going too fast, just tell me. So we still have a lot to cover. Again, we are discussing the entire PM book for this one. So more or less, you're going to have after this, after we're done, we're going to have a better idea of what is the content of the PM book and what are the actual application in the actual project. So that is the flow that I'm showing you right now. Okay, next, once we have identified the resources, how we plan out or the guide in resource planning, we're going to plan out the communications. Why is it important? Why is communications important? One thing, because we are dealing with stakeholders. We are dealing with stakeholders, meaning when we plan our communications management, we are establishing something. We are establishing a guide or a rule for us to deal with the stakeholders later on as we progress in our project, especially in the execution stage. So what could be the content of this one, of this document? So when we do this, we are setting the rules. Again, if it is a game, we are setting whatever guide for us to communicate. So technically, we need to identify the 4H. Is it 4H? Okay, we need to identify the 4 W's and 1H. We need to identify what to communicate, who to communicate to, where, what are the means, where to communicate. Do we need meetings? Do we need face-to-face discussion? Also, we need to identify when, every day, every other day, weekly. So we need to identify that one in this document or this plan communications management. Also, it is good if you could identify that one of how the mode of communication. Do we need to send emails only? Would that be sufficient? Or once we send out email, do we need to make a follow-up call right away or after 30 minutes? Or is it good to, especially for vendors, is it good to give them follow-ups every other week or weekly or twice a week? So we need to identify that here. We need to plan out because in the planning, definitely it is more on strategizing. When we execute the project, what are we going to do? So again, for the communications plan, this is really important because we're dealing with stakeholders. Okay, next. Okay, next is another set of processes that is very useful in the preparation of our project management plan. So this is one of the, normally this is when we're talking about project management, these processes are usually specially mentioned. Of course, aside from the triple constraints, if we're studying project management, commonly or common terms is the triple constraints. But this one is another area. So this set of processes is also one of the common terms we identify or we associate when we study or when we are dealing with project management, which is the risk management. Okay, so we have 5 activities under risk. If communications is located or could be found in chapter 10, risk management, all that discusses about risk is found in chapter 11. So for planning, we have 11.1, we have plan risk management. Same with what we have started, we are setting the rules, plan and management. Plan management. We are setting the rules or guidelines on how we're going to deal with the risks. But what are the risks? What are risk management? So actually, risks are anything, whether it is an event, an object, even a stakeholder could be a risk. Any object or entity or things that happens that is affecting our project positively or negatively. So could be identified as a risk. That's why we have the plan risk management or the risk management plan. So from this, from our risk management plan, we are identifying the keyword here is, you could take note, the keyword is tolerance. The keywords, actually keywords are tolerance or threshold. So how can we say this? Risk, then the keywords are tolerance and threshold. It means what is or what are the risks we consider in our project and what are those we don't consider as risk. So we have a lot of things that could affect our project. But the question is, does our project or does our company or does our organization consider them as risk or not? It is dependent on our threshold. It is dependent on our tolerance. Sometimes, for example, loss of a budget, let's say 5%. Some company over budget of this percentage is already considered a major risk. But for some company or some project, consider this as nothing at all. So same amount, same value, same situation, but dependent on the tolerance or the threshold of a company or a project. So if we're able to identify this one here, then we could identify whatever is the tolerance that our project can take. So that is part of our risk management plan. Then we have other processes for the risk management. 11.2 is identification of this risk. Okay, so we already know that our company or our organization have this certain threshold or certain tolerance that we consider a certain list of items, a certain list of events as risk or not. So for this or from this, we could identify what are the risks. So from this, we could identify with the stakeholders the things that may happen to the project. See, we already have our tolerance. Now, we're identifying, could this be the risk for our project, considering that one, the tolerance that we have? So these are the identification. Again, it is related to the stakeholders who are involved in our project. Because again, any entity that is affected one way or another by our project, our stakeholders, ourselves, our client, our vendors, even our neighbors or our colleagues are considered as stakeholders. So identification of the risk, that is the next process. Next, 11.3, once we have identified this risk, sometimes I got lucky for this project. Since I'm the BIM manager, I was invited to contribute also in preparing these documents. So currently we were able to have the risk register preparation, or even the risk management plan, as early as before the project kicks off, the actual publication and the actual construction. So with this, if we were able to identify a list of risks, from our project, we have around 600, because we were invited, or we were encouraged to have per discipline. All discipline involved safety, stakeholders. We are going to identify. We need to identify the risk. Then from that one, we're going to classify the risk by using these two. Okay, I'll just show the next two processes. Okay, the next two processes are the risk analysis. So we have two processes for the risk analysis. But the question is, why do we need to have risk analysis? We have identified the risk. Why do we need to have an analysis? Simply because we need to identify from this analysis the probability that this risk is going to occur in our project and the impact is going to have on our project. So those are the two major things, or two major reasons why we need to have risk analysis based on the one that we have identified and listed. Because some of these risks may be less likely to happen, but some of these risks are more likely to happen and have really huge impact on the outcome of our project. So we really need to devise a plan to control this. So again, once we have identified, we will do the risk analysis. We have two, the qualitative and the quantitative. Qualitative is more on the properties. It is measurable. Usually, we could have this one risk analysis on the physical properties based on a scale or a standard like length, like a certain color, or those that we can measure. So based on the qualities, more or less, of this risk that we have identified. Then for quantitative, usually this is more on mathematical. So we have a lot of tools and techniques. We call it TT, tools and techniques to do this. I think last year's presentation we were able to enumerate some. So some of this quantitative analysis includes the dotted line analysis. So in short, just to have a general idea on this one, the qualitative risk analysis is more on scalable and standard. So we're just comparing. This item should be weighing this, something like that. That is more on the qualities. But quantitative is more on studying, or more on mathematical. Okay. Then we have all these we have four processes for the risk management. We're expected to have an output of risk responses plan. So with all those said, we said a lot regarding risk management, why is it important. The main goal is for us as project managers, or as member of the project management team, with regards to risk, we really need to formulate something, and this something needs to be incorporated in our project management plan. So for the risk, we really need to come up with a list of the responses. we have identified the risk, we need to also identify how our project team or how our resources going to respond whenever this risk arises. That's why we are analyzing the probability and we are analyzing the impact. With this, if we're able to identify the likelihood or the probability and the impact, we could sort out which one should be prioritized. And we need to plan out the responses on this prioritized activity or list of risk. Okay, as simple as that one. Although it is more complicated when we're doing it in the actual, but whenever we have identified the risk, we are simply stating what is the better way to act on this. We don't want to be reactive when we respond. That's why we are stating this. We are planning out this possibility. So we don't want to be reactive because most of the time, if we are reactive and as project management team or as PM, it is critical for our project if we cannot really decide quickly. So these are our guides. This is going to help us out when we execute our plan and when we encounter this risk during our project life cycle. Okay. So again, our actions here are based on the uh, risk analysis. So that's why we are really doing this. And again, take note that this is fluid. Some changes could be affecting this one or vice versa. So the arrows are moving all around. Then, all in all, once we have prepared these items, especially the risk response plan, we are going to incorporate it or integrate them in our project management plan. So we have covered the scope, we have covered the schedule, we have covered cost, quality, resources, communications, and risk. Then we're going to cover procurement. So we need to plan out the procurement as well. What is procurement? Simply buying. It is because it is plan, procurement, management, and as what we always say when we started this part of our lecture, plan and management could be considered the rules when we apply it, or the rules that will guide us during the execution part of the project. So this time we are formulating some rules for the procurement. Is it again similar to the resource management? This time we are going to answer, are we going to buy or are we going to make? Example, installation or building of a certain server. Some of those parts most probably we already have in our company, or maybe we have the capability to build that certain piece. So most likely, as project managers, as project management team, we could decide, okay, we can make that part. For example, the casing. But for some of the parts, we really need to purchase. So we identify in this document, in this plan, which aspects we could purchase and we could create on our own, or which aspect of this project we really need to purchase or buy. Okay, as simple as that for the procurement. Just answering that question. Next, the last process for planning for this domain. To complete our project management plan, we need to plan the stakeholder engagement. So stakeholders are really, really important. As member of the team, we are also stakeholders. Our resources, especially the manpower, are considered stakeholders, but especially the clients. So these are the stakeholders. So we need to plan out the stakeholder engagement. Remember, earlier we discussed the communications management. We have highlighted that this one, the planning of our communications management, are solely or are focused on the engagement of our stakeholders. So this time we're going to plan out as well. So what are these? It is more on not the communication lines. Earlier, this one is more on how to communicate. Is it more on meetings, send email, call? This time, we need to identify our stakeholders. And normally we map out. We do some stakeholder mapping. What are stakeholder mapping? We are identifying our stakeholders based on their influence and power. So um, I think we would not be able to cover that one in the course or in this workshop, but it is like a 4-quadrant. It is a 4-quadrant um, box wherein the vertical axis is the power and the horizontal axis is the influence. So P and I. So we need to identify if our stakeholders have more power and more influence, or less influence, more power, and so on. So that is part of our stakeholder engagement analysis or mapping. So in short, it is more on most of these communications are reinforcing the stakeholders engagement. Remember, we have these two twins. These are two related tasks. This time, did you notice the purple flower? It's too small. Anyway, I zoom in later. So we have two activities with purple flower or purple sunflower. So these two, the communications management and the stakeholder engagement plan, are another twin activities or really interrelated activities, because most communications are reinforcing the engagement, the interest of our stakeholders so that we can work together to meet our scope. Okay, so these two are the interrelated processes: communications and stakeholder engagement. So we already have first twin, second twin, or second really closely related processes. And that closes the planning domain. So this, the planning of the scope, planning of the schedule, planning of the cost, quality management plan, the resource plan, the communications plan, the risk responses plan, the procurement plan, and the stakeholder engagement plan. All of these processes will be contributing in the development of our management plan. So this is the main document or main output of this domain, which encapsulates the rules or the guidelines we're going to have when we move to the next domain or the next part of the process groups, which is execution or executing the project. Okay, everyone is good so far? So we are midway to complete the 5 domains. So we discussed only 2, but planning is one of the major domains. So there's a lot of processes involved. Okay. So any questions if you have you can type it in the chat box, and we could pause also to answer if we can. Okay. Okay, let's proceed. The next, the next process group or domain. So remember, we have 5. We already discussed initiating and planning. So 2 down out of 5. 3 more to go. But if you see, if you notice here, planning is one of the one of the biggest domains. So many processes involved in planning, because we really need to prepare for the execution of the project or the actual implementation. Okay, so let's proceed with the next domain or process group, which is executing or execution of the project. So similarly, as what we have mentioned again and again, these processes or domains are being glued together by, I hope you still remember, by integration process. So again, for initiating, we have the integration process of development of charter. For planning, we have the integration process of development of a management plan. So expectedly, when we discuss the execution phase, we are expected to see also that this is revolving, or the processes are revolving around an integration process. But this time, we have 2 integration processes. So the next 2 are, we could say, in the actual project, they goes hand in hand. It doesn't mean that one process group needs to finish before we could do the next one. So it is most likely that these are crisscrossing in the actual project. So we have the execution, then we have the monitoring and the controlling. Because within the execution stage of the project, we are doing a lot of monitoring, correct? We are doing a lot of change controls, correct? But this time, for easier explanation or discussion, we will discuss first executing. Again, I want to highlight these 2 are crisscrossing during a certain stage of the project. Okay, let's proceed with executing.
Sir, okay, we have a question sa chat box.
Okay, sir.
Okay, question is from BP Richard. Do we strictly follow all the processes for planning, or we can skip other process in the yes?
Okay, sir. Understood. Okay, this is just an ideal scenario. It is better to be guided by this one, but it doesn't mean that we really need to have all of this, because in many or some projects, some of these processes are not really applicable. But what we're just saying is we can skip some of these minor processes, but it is better to take note that if we should be able to create the WBS, to create a schedule, a budget, an estimate, a risk response. Sometimes, or actually many projects here in Singapore, only a few are practicing this one, the risk responses, and because procurement sometimes is handled by the procurement department. So meaning it is a company-wide, not a project-based. So whatever procurement plan, we usually apply what is already formulated by the company. So if we are managing a project, we could skip this one already. Like this one. We could skip this because some are company standard already for the procurement. And this one we normally do the communications and the stakeholder engagement, but not necessarily analysis of the stakeholders. Sometimes we just simply a simple document only, or sometimes we really don't apply this. We are more focused on this one. We're setting communication lines. So yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, we are allowed to omit some of the processes.
Okay. Sir, one more question galing
No,
kay
sir.
Jeff. Do we also include last minute project changes in the project cost estimation or budget?
Yes, sir. Later on, we're going to cover that one in monitoring and control. And later on, this triangle here, we will highlight, meaning we could redo the processes. That's why the arrows are really moving back and forth. Same with the process flow. So we're going to identify that one, the project change here, and it will be affecting the budget as well. So this one, that question will be covering in, sorry, we'll be covering here in the monitoring and control, which is the fourth domain or project process group
Okay.
that is for Sir Jap.
Okay. Sir, pwede po ba mag-break muna for 10 minutes?
Oh, okay, sir. Para makainom din.
Oo, para makainom din. Okay.
Okay.
We'll have a 10 minutes break.
Mm.
We'll be back by 3:48 on my time here. Okay.
Yep.
Break first.
Okay, good, good.
Okay.
Okay, see you in 10 minutes.
Yes, see you in 10 minutes. Sir Lex.
Oh, yes, sir.
Ay, ito pala nakalimutan ko itanong sa'yo before dun sa first part ng project management.
Mm.
Okay. If, for example, you didn't proceed on going through yung yung project management training, submit by yourself yung mga projects na nagawa mo within the 3-year span, and then who will be your who will be your guide on submitting those projects if you have?
Example, yung magpo-proceed ka sa PMP, sir, di ba?
Yes, sir.
The application is online. The application is online unless you are audited. You don't have to show any documents. You don't need to submit any documents. Pero kapag napili ka or you get, kasi random yung auditing. If you get audited, yes, if you get audited, you need to submit the certificate of the 35 hours contact hours, meaning umattend ka talaga ng course. Then for the projects, that's why it is advisable that you only declare the projects na meron kang certificate of employment or may proof ka talaga na pirmado ng manager mo or ng director nyo. So once you get audited, kasi kailangan mo i-send yun. I don't know, I think it is certified true copy talaga yung hinahanap nila or clear copy with stamp or something nung boss mo. Once na-audit ka, pero again, if you get lucky, you don't need to send any document. Hassle lang kung ikaw audit.
Okay.
Kasi need mo talaga i-send sa US, sir. Sa US talaga yung yung documents.
Okay, noted sa information na yun, sir.
Yes, sir.
May mga katanungan pa po yung iba before we start the topic on this first part ng planning, because magiging in-depth na yung itong executing and then tong monitoring control hanggang sa closing.
Yes.
Parang walang mga katanungan lahat
Gising pa ba? Gising?
Serious lahat, sir.
Nakatulog. Maganda yung tanong ni Sir Chad actually, tsaka ni Sir. Yung kay Sir Jeff, dito natin masasagot yun sa controlling.
Okay.
Tapos yung kay Sir Richard naman, again, talagang hindi na-apply ng iba. Depende sa project, case to case. Depende sa humingi.
Okay, noted, sir. Para aware din lang if talagang kailangan i-execute yung buong planning stage, which is pala. Okay.
And-emphasize lang natin dito, sir. Kasi ito yung, for this workshop, we are dealing with familiarizing ourselves with the content of the PM book, which is yun talaga yung source ng PMP questions. So at least with this discussion, yung pinresent, andun lahat ng processes na expect natin for the exam. At least yun nga, one time lang natin kinover. Although kasi for this course, yung succeeding Saturdays natin, yung isa nakafocus sa scope, yung isa nakafocus sa schedule, tsaka sa cost at integration. Kasi you notice lahat niyan is may integration. So the rest, hindi na natin yun ma-meet for this specific workshop. So at least na-introduce na natin ngayong araw. Familiar na yung iba. Nakikita nila na, may 5 palang risk process sa planning. May 3 pala or 2 sa resources. Kasi hindi natin ito matatakel sa succeeding Saturdays natin.
Okay, noted.
So yun, kaya pinresent natin this way. Para yun nga, yun yung content talaga ng PM book.
Okay, sir.
You can proceed?
Let's proceed po. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the break. Okay. Again, we are emphasizing that these processes in the planning are more on our guide for the execution of the project. And again, the execution and this the fourth domain, the monitoring and control, goes hand in hand, because some processes in the execution stage we do monitor and we do control, especially if there's changes, and all of these changes definitely covering the scope, covering the schedule, the cost, the budget, even the risk. So that would be discussed later on. So again, just highlighting the fluidity of this flow. Although this is a typical setup, it's really a good thing to understand that this is how these processes are coming in when it comes to the actual project. And again, as highlighted by Sir Richard, from what I have experienced, many of us, even here in Singapore, many project management team doesn't really fully utilize or apply this. So, but for us, since we're dealing with JTC, they are very strict. So more or less, we were able to apply most of this one, especially in the planning, because they are really document centered. Where they really wanted to have traceability. Okay, so to proceed, now we're done with the initiating. This is initiating again. We are answering the what. We are answering the question, what is the project all about? What are need to be delivered and who are the involved? For the planning, these processes, all of those that we have discussed a while ago, the planning is answering as the project managers or the project management team members. We are answering the question of how. How are we going to do this, do that when it comes to the execution of the project? So now let us proceed. Let's jump into execution or executing. So again, we are highlighting that every project process or group or domain, we have 5, it is always centered to an integration process. Similarly, execution, the first process here is integration. Okay, the first 2 processes are integration. 4.3, this is the chapter. 4.3, we are direct and manage project work. So we're already doing the project. We're doing the actual project. We have prepared the plans already. We have prepared more or less the documents of how we're going to attack. How are we going to execute the project so that the scopes and the requirements of the stakeholders are met. Okay, so first things first, we need to direct and manage the project work. We need to do this because technically, if we are project managers or we are the part of the project management team, we are not the one who really executes those activities, right? I hope everyone agrees. So more or less, we only do the directing and the managing of those works because we have our resources, our manpower to do that for us, more or less. Sometimes, of course, the project team, the project manager itself is involved on certain activities, but more or less, especially if we have bigger projects, we cannot afford to really be part of the workforce because we are really preoccupied on the project management aspect. Okay, so that is direct and manage the project works. It is more or less, again, managing the resources identified per activity. So in our planning stage, we have identified the resources that we need for this duration, etc. So this time, during the execution, we simply direct and manage the project work or the resources identified. Next, this is a new one. This is the added process based on what I read, what I memorized years ago from 5th edition. They have added this one in the 6th edition. So we have 4.4, another integration process. It is managing the project knowledge. What is managing the project knowledge? These are technically the lessons learned. So when we are executing the project, we are listing down, we are identifying what we did on our previous project, or even in our current project. It is a good practice to list down what are the things that are working for us based on what we have identified in our plans, or what are especially good to note, what are those that doesn't work for us, what are the ones that we have identified, what are the activities or any aspect of the project that does not work for us that we have planned out. It is really good to identify them as lessons learned. So again, what is working and what are not working based on our plans, we are encouraged to list them place them in a register. So that is management of project knowledge. So these two is going to be the integration processes, the heart of the execution. As we have mentioned earlier, integration processes are the glue so that we have smooth processes for each domain or process group. Okay, so after the integration, what we usually do is we manage quality. Is it quality? Yes, we manage quality. We have identified already our scope. Then in the planning, we already identified the quality management plan, meaning we already set whatever standards that we need to meet these scopes. So this time, we are going to manage our quality, meaning are the results that we are expecting based on what we have written down in our plans are the ones we're getting? So those are the questions we need to check. That's why we are doing quality checks or quality management. Simply because we need to identify, we want to know if what we have planned out, what are the expectations are the ones we're getting or the results we're getting during the execution or the project implementation. So again, the managed quality is going to be incorporated on these two processes. So these are part. Management is management of our quality is again part of the directing the project work and project knowledge. So again, if we observed items, we observe processes, we observe any activities that deviate from the standards that we set based on quality, then we could identify that and record that in our lessons learned, which is management of the project knowledge. Okay, I hope that is clear. Then another process for this execution is the acquisition of resources, which is, as we have mentioned earlier, chapter 9 is about resources. So this time for execution, we acquire resources. Okay, earlier we have planned. We have planned the resources, we have estimated the activity resources. This time, simply put, we do the buying or we do the acquisition. Okay? So we plan out whether we buy or make, whether we hire a team or we hire somebody for this specific project. So that is acquisition or acquired resources. So we really execute this time the plans. Okay, so in turn, we have two other resource-related processes. The next one is once we have acquired, meaning we hire or we purchase, meaning we have decided already we need a team. So during execution stage of the project, we develop this team. Also, we manage the team. Almost the same, right? For the acquire resources, we have developed the team and we manage the team. So almost the same meaning, but how come it is stated here? So again, it is chapter 9. So what is the difference? Developing a team, you're just simply putting in your manpower. Most probably, you're going to train if needed. You're going to send them for training. So that's part of developing a team. Aside from forming the team, maybe you get a lead, you get assistant lead or engineers. So that is developing a team. But management or managing a team is more on productivity related. For example, you get a team member that is scheduled to have on leave or to go home for 2 weeks. So managing a team is to identify who could cover, because of course our work doesn't stop. Your scope, your list of activities doesn't stop, even if your part of your resource or part of your team needs to go home. So that is more on management of a team, looking for a substitute or to compensate for that one. So that's one example, which we usually encounter, right? We usually encounter that one. Who will be covering for you? So as part of a project management team during the actual execution, sometimes if we are leads, sometimes our managers would be asking us for our leave plans, for example. Because as project managers, we are, especially on companies that are man-hour based, sometimes we are counting the number of hours and we could generate the productivity index of our staff, of our manpower. So if there's a deviation, which is, of course, you could not foresee that this guy or this member would be on leave. So you need to compensate because you already generated your planned productivity for that month or for that week or for that period. So that's one way of managing a team. Another one is we usually prepare forecasting for related to this team management. So again, you develop, it's more on the quality of the team or the number of the team members, and management is more on the productivity, the leaves, etc. Okay, I hope that is clear. So during execution stage, we have three processes related to resources: acquire resource, develop a team, and manage a team. So again, these three subgroup or group of processes would be contributing on the directing and management of our project work. Okay, so again, these two are interrelated, these two. So these two are the heart or the glue, the integration processes. So sometimes there are lessons learned also on how we manage our team, how we develop our team, which we could apply on the next project or probably the next period of our execution stage. So that's why it is really a good practice to have lessons learned registry or register. Sometimes we only do that in Excel, so it's quite handy. But of course, because of the technology, there's a lot of softwares that are capable of doing that for us. So that is one way of managing a project digitally. Okay, so to continue, another process after we have we have executed using the resources. The next process is manage communications. Why do we need to manage the communications? So again, we have highlighted in the planning, we already have our communications plan. Then it is related on the stakeholder engagement. Now this time, during the execution stage, we need to see if the one that we have planned, the communications line that we have in our plan is really working during the execution stage. So maybe some of the issues arises, or some are for unforeseen. Maybe on the earlier part of the year, for example, in general, earlier part of the year, um, virtual meetings or Zoom meetings or team meetings are not forecasted or not foreseen in a normal basis. But we need to work on that because of the current situation. So that is a change in our communication line. So we need to highlight that one here during the execution stage. So that is more on managing of our communication. Sometimes we need to identify also if meetings are met, or is it sufficient, or is it too much. So those are the things that we need to identify during the execution stage when it comes to communication. So that's basically managing our communications or communication lines. Again, highlighting again and again, mostly we are doing this, we are managing, we're planning our communications because we really want full engagement of our stakeholders. We really need to be aligned with the stakeholders. Okay. So again, this one is contributing to the integration processes. Okay, so the arrow here. Next process is the implementation of the risk responses. If we remember a while ago, part of the output in the planning stage for risk or risk management is the risk responses plan. This one, risk responses plan in the planning stage. So we need to monitor that one during execution. We need to implement that one. So whenever risk arises, we are going to look back at our plan and implement them as much as possible. So again, not all the risks that we have identified in our risk register or in our, because risk register, you identify the risk and correspondingly you also identify the responses. So based on that document, sometimes not all the risks we have enumerated we encounter during the implementation, but some also we do encounter. So at least we already have a certain guide or document of how are we going to react to this specific risk. So that's what we are looking at during execution, the implementation of these risk responses. So that's one good thing if you're able to prepare that one, the risk register with the corresponding risk responses. Okay, another thing to point out here, this process is an addition. It is something new for the 6th if compared to the 5th edition. So this is another new process included. Okay. So to proceed, during the execution stage, we also do the actual procurement. We have planned out for whatever we need to purchase, whatever we need to buy. So this time we are doing the actual procurement. We are doing the actual buying of the planned resources that we need to purchase based on the activities. so that we can comply with the scopes. So again, we are doing the actual buying or procurements based on our plan. Then if you noticed, this is one thing we need to highlight here. If you notice, there's another flower appears. Can you see it? So the red flower meaning there's another process that this one is really close to, or more or less they are correlated with each other. So let's say they are twin activities. So for the conduct procurements, it is said to be closely related to the acquiring or the acquisition of the resources. So acquiring resources, again, it is I need to buy this. So you need to buy. So you need to buy in 9.3. So you conduct the procurement. You need to purchase. So these two goes hand in hand. Whatever we need to acquire, especially on the material resources or maybe equipments as well as based on our planning, then we do that in the conduct of procurement or the actual purchasing. We need to buy, we buy. We need to purchase, we purchase. Okay, so these two is the third related activity. So we have two in planning. Again, in planning, we have estimate duration and activity resources. Then we also have communications and stakeholder engagement. Now, this time during execution stage, we have the acquire resources and the conduct of procurements. So that's three twin activities or closely related activities. Okay, and lastly, for the execution domain, we have the manage stakeholder engagement. So this is chapter 13 at the last part. So we're really giving highlight on the stakeholders. So this time during execution stage, we manage the stakeholder engagement. Again, you have highlighted here that we are planning out the communications because of the stakeholders. Then we also plan the stakeholder engagement. We're planning the communication so that we could maintain the stakeholder engagement. So during execution, that is planning. So during execution, this time we manage the stakeholder engagement. So managing the stakeholder engagement means what is really happening. Is something changing? So we need to look out for that. Meaning, is the interest of this stakeholder diminishing, or maybe there's a certain deviation, maybe this certain stakeholder we planned out during our planning stage, intermediate power, then suddenly this stakeholder becomes more powerful. So that's a change we need to note. So that's part of the managing the engagement for the stakeholders in the execution or the implementation stage or domain. Okay, again, for stakeholders engagement, it is more related to power and interest or influence. Okay, P and I. So that's it for execution. That is for execution or executing. Now we're going to move forward to monitoring and control. As we have highlighted earlier, these two comes hand in hand. They are crisscrossing because some of the items that we manage during execution, we also monitor and control. So we're going to discuss the processes involved. So same thing with the three domains that we already discussed. The monitoring and controlling, which is the fourth domain, is also centered on an integration process. So we still have integration process as the center process for this process group or domain. Okay, so that is important to remember. Same with executing or execution, we also have two integration processes for monitoring and control. One is monitor and control the project work. So during execution, we have direct and manage project work. And during monitoring and control, we monitor and control the project work. So what's this? So execution is doing the work, right? Then monitoring and control is making sure that the work are being done as planned out. So that's why we are monitoring and controlling. So again, we plan, then during execution, we implement or we are doing the things, the works. Then in the monitoring and controlling, we are making sure that the work are being done. Okay? So next, again, integration is found in chapter 4. So for monitoring control, we have monitor control project work. And also, we have perform integrated change control. So this is very critical during this stage. This is the one highlighted or questioned by Sir Jeff a while ago. So for this stage or for this domain, we are really focusing on the performance of the integrated change control. Meaning whatever changes that are happening in our project, it is really important to have this process because any project changes or deviation from plans is affecting other processes because of the word integrated, meaning we are not only looking at one aspect. We're not only looking at the changes that will affect cost, not only isolating schedule or the scope. Most of the time, these are because of the term integrated. We are looking at the changes or deviations from our plans during the execution stage, whatever changes or deviations that are affecting the entirety of our project. So we are monitoring that one. That's why it is really important for us as project managers or project management team to perform integrated change controls. So again, these are not only scope-based or time-based or cost-based, but more on the entirety of the project. So similar to the execution domain or process group, we have two integration processes for monitoring control. Okay, good to highlight two processes, integration processes. So what are the other processes that will help this one? That will help us do the monitoring and controlling and do the integrated change control. What are the other processes that we need to look out for or we need to conduct during monitoring? So first of all is the scope. During monitoring and control, we need to validate scope. These are just checking if the scope are really there during the execution, or whatever we're doing, the scope are identified, and what we're doing is aligned to the accomplishment or the completion of that scope. So we're just checking this one of whatever scope that we have identified. Next, so we have two scope processes here. We control scope. So once we have validated or checked, okay, correct, these are the scopes. Then we control scope. What does this mean? Controlling scope means we are concerned with the changes. whatever deviation in the scope, for example, suddenly the client wants to add something. So that is part of the scope control process that we need to highlight. And that will be affecting this one, the integrated change control. Usually we discuss this one in details. We have a lot of change logs. We have signatories to what you call that, to authorize the application of these changes. So for the integrated change control for this workshop, we could not fully discuss that one. So anyway, these are the processes involved for that. So whenever there's a change of scope, we are controlling that one. Control scope concerning on the changes. Integrated changes meaning not only the not only related to scope but affecting the entirety of the project. So we need to have close monitoring on that one. We really need to have proper channels, proper um, modes of communicating this one as well. So those changes, that's why we have this integrated change control. So again, we have two processes for scope during the monitoring and controlling. And these two processes will be helping out in our integration. Next is we have the control of schedule. So we have the scope. Of course, there are deviation of schedule. So we need to control this. Again, it's really good to highlight that we are performing integrated change control simply because our project really changes from the plans that we had. We really formulate a plan, but I believe all projects have deviations or changes. That's why we really need to have this process or activity. So we have integration control or control of scope. We also have control of schedule. This is more on the issues related to the timeline or related to time. So the deviations from our plans, from our proposed schedule, most of the time we are required to do catch-up plans, and we need to present them again. We need to present them again to our stakeholders and eventually to ask them for approval. So this could be affected by a lot of things. That's why we have identified the risk as well. So that's part of the control schedule. So we are not only monitoring our schedule, monitoring is more on the accomplishments or the completion or progress. But most importantly, the changes or the deviation of our approved schedule or timeline. So we need to have control on that one. Again, it is simply focusing on the changes in related to time. Next, after schedule, normally we have cost. So why do we need to control cost? Sometimes, actually most of the time, these are the changes that we encounter in our real project. I think all of us, most of us were able to experience this one. Some changes are affecting our scope. Sometimes this change in scope would be affecting our schedule, and in turn, some of these change in scope would be affecting the cost. So we really need to have control on this one. Again, this is concerning control of over budgeting, over budget. Because honestly, if our deviation or changes will help us have a lesser budget, definitely it's on our favor. But that is that's a scenario that seldom happens to actual projects. Most of the time, we are more on the over budget side, meaning we have underestimated our budget, meaning sometimes we overlook some things that eventually becomes a bigger spending factor for our project. So we need to control this. We need to control cost, more on control over budgeting and changes in costs. So we need to monitor and control. Next, after the scope, schedule, cost, quality comes in. Again, this is from chapter 8, quality control, where I think all of us are familiar also with quality control. It is part of the processes, project management process during monitoring and control. Again, we are looking at, or we are controlling the change in quality or deviation in the expected quality. Because again, many many circumstances, many factors are really affecting these changes in our project. So we need to look at also the quality. Sometimes maybe we have, for citing an example for a construction project, for example, some of our welding materials were unexpectedly um, not considered to react on a certain environment, so that will definitely affect our quality. Or sometimes, not only the materials, sometimes there's a deviation in the procurement, because in our case, for that specific example, sometimes we just indicate that one in the plans, the grade and similar to. So if our purchasing we're able to buy not the one we specified, so certain quality changes or deviations could happen, and actually it really happens on site. So that's one example. Then not only that one, of course all projects will be encountering changes in quality affecting because of several factors. But the main point is during this process, we really need to have a control of the quality. That's why we prepared the quality management plan here. That's why we prepared this. So during execution, we are going to have a document or a certain guide to help us. So controlling the quality. Next, of course, after quality, we are controlling resources. The question we need to answer is, are the resources really functioning as expected or planned? So specifically, the manpower that we have allocated, or the team that we have developed, are they really functioning as expected, as planned? So we need to control that one. So again, these changes here, the control of this is going to help out in the integration, in the performance of the integrated change control. So again, for the control resources, it is dealing with the manpower or the resources and their performance in comparison to our planned. So we have identified that one here, the plan resource management, and we have developed and managed here. Then in turn, we are monitoring and controlling their functions. Okay, so to proceed, the next process is related to communications. So again, if you notice, we are moving per chapter. Chapter 5, Chapter 6, Chapter 7, Chapter 8, Chapter 9. Then Chapter 10 is communications. Why do we need to monitor communications, or what do we mean saying the monitoring of communications? It is more on maybe we need to change something to update the plan or the execution. So maybe some of the communication lines that we have planned here, can you see it, are not really working during the execution stage. So we have management of communications here. So if there's any deviation, then we need to do monitoring communications. Sometimes we could change, we could add communication lines, or we could improve. So it's case by case based on this one, based on what is happening. So that's why we really highlighted that execution processes are really fluidly related to the monitoring and controlling. So we have the managing communications here, and we need to monitor the communications as well. Okay. Next, after communications, we usually it comes with risk. Okay. Chapter 11 is risk. So what do we mean by monitor risk? Monitor risk means controlling, controlling relevant changes in risk. Remember, we have highlighted the risk in our plan, and we also have the risk responses. Assuming that we are religiously practicing or updating our risk register, we need to implement whatever response on the risk that we encountered on site. So we are monitoring these risks. So related on the changes on the risk. Okay, so these two for the execution of the implementation of risk response, then we are monitoring them hand in hand. Okay, what we implement, we monitor. What we implement, we control. So what is the process or activities we are doing in the execution, we do in the controlling and monitoring as well. Next, so next is control the procurements. So as we have discussed earlier, procurements related to controlling the changes or deviation that are related to procurement. So, for example, we have planned to buy a server from a specific brand. So I'm going to cite that one in my actual project. So we have selected, we have identified that this server is the one we need. It is single server that is going to cater for 8 users using the 3D modeling tool that is also specified. So we have identified this. We spoke with the vendor already. It is already approved by the software vendor, already approved by the top management during that time, and already approved by the stakeholders, which is the client. Then, for some reason, the one that is purchased is a different one, and the purchasing team failed to inform us, specifically me, failed to inform me that they are going to purchase the other server. So definitely, normally on my case, the one that I have encountered also before, we usually have some issues on the server. Not major issue, but we normally do have a connection issues with the specific 3D software. So now we could not directly go to the vendor because it is different. It is different from the one that we really thought we're going to use. So it's deviating from the plan I had, the execution plan that I had. So I need to have this integrated change control document, similar to this one, not specifically this term, but we need to have that one since we're expecting other engineers and designers to use, and it might mislead them because the one that we have declared in our previous document is another software. So that's a change in a procurement plan, and it's really affecting, especially when we're going to face issues. So again, the cost is affected, the functionality, of course. So the scope is affected. We need to buy additional stand for that one. So, and again, because of the servicing and the reinstallation, our schedule was also affected. So we need to prepare this and present to the director. We need to present the change control. So anyway, that's just one specific example of the control procurements. So we really need to look at this, especially on our case, it is not a project-based procurement. It is more on the company procurement team. Okay, then lastly, since this is already chapter 12, chapter 13 is about stakeholders. So monitoring of the stakeholder engagement. So again, going back to the plan, we have the planning of the stakeholder engagement, and we are also reinforcing that one here when we manage the stakeholder engagement. Once we manage this, we also need to monitor. Monitor stakeholder engagement, meaning the changes in communications or changes in the stakeholder engagement, how they react, are they, because sometimes, as example, some vendors are very quick to respond in the earlier part of the project. Then later on, most probably when they were able to accomplish half of the requirement from their end, suddenly there's a shift or a change in the way they engage. So that's one thing we need to look out for, and it should be well noted how are we going to monitor and manage this stakeholder engagement. So similarly, some of the project stakeholders are like that, like clients. Then suddenly they get a different project, so lesser time or lesser engagement are given to our current projects, something like that. So again, we're just emphasizing that these processes, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder engagement are going to be helping out in the integration processes as we monitor and control the project. So again, the importance of discussing this, we know at least how many processes are within that domain, and more or less when they enter the scene. So again, highlighting the integration are the heart or the center of each domain. So we already covered 4. We're closing. We're going to have the last one with only one process. So again, highlighting these arrows here, it is very fluid, and it is better to be that way when we are doing our actual project. Okay. So last for this day, I think we're on time. Last is closing. The only process here is integration. Close the project or phase. Actually, in the 5th edition, we have several actually. We have 2 processes here. Now it is incorporated here. I think the other one is related to resources. So now everything is covered under one process, which is close, project, or phase. So again, from 47, it becomes 49 because we have deleted one, or we remove one from the closing, but we have added 2. We have added to the risk response. So that's why it becomes risk response and human resource. We become resource only. Okay, so we're done. This is the um, last process group or domain. So just to highlight again, we have discussed this one so that the participants will have an understanding of what they could look for in the PM book. And these are all the processes and what are the corresponding processes under the planning domain, under the initiation domain, or process group. Okay, process group or domain. So these are the words that are usually used. Then under those domain, we have these processes. Okay, we're done with this. Any questions or clarifications?
Okay, hi guys. If you have any clarification, now it's the time that you can ask with Sir Lex on how the actual process flow works sa ating project management. Because this one is a very, very detailed one actually. But based on what I learned, dapat hindi ka maging involved sa part ng executing. Kasi dapat you have to direct the project plan. But sometimes as our part as IT, sometimes we are being included with the executing din. If wala talagang makuha na vendor,
Usually ganun.
end up we're the ones doing the execution, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closing din.
Ganun din yung nangyayari sa ano. It happens also in the main contractor side and some smaller companies on our side as well. So this one I'm going to share. So tonight I'm going, Sir John, I'm going to request for the emails of the participants. I'm going to send out this. Actually, the process, of course, is not shown, but only the one pager that you could use in your review, if ever. So we're going to send this out. These are free. And also, one homework is the Excel, just to practice how to fill up only one project, only one-liner. So at least you know to fill up one sample for the application.
Okay guys, may katanungan kayo kay Sir Lex. Ito na yung time na pwede na kayo magtanong.
Wala nang break.
Wala nang break.
Patapos na.
Patapos na to. Magtanong na kayo. Very informative actually yung afternoon natin kasi it's very detailed actually yung yung explanation ni Sir on this part ng project management. Kasi we're actually all of us were doing this but mostly on the executing side. And then syempre monitoring controls, we're part of it.
Familiar talaga.
But the part of the planning cost, yan ang hindi sa side natin. Usually it's the part ng executing, control, monitoring, and closing. Sa side ng IT.
Yeah. So at least it's good to know na we have these processes. At least we'll know kung saan ba yung pinapractice natin. What are the processes that we are practicing in our company, in our work. So it's good to know because this is one of the big chunk of the PMP exam if ever we're going to take. So one of the big chunk is the planning and the monitoring. So it's good to these three actually: planning, executing, monitoring, control.
Yes.
So again, for the succeeding Saturdays, you will just be focusing on the scope, schedule, cost. I would like to share something on risk pero hindi na kaya. Baka ma-overload na. So that's the series of topics that we have proposed to Doc Ryan.
Okay, another question from Sir Richard. Just to ask on the resource and procurement, how differentiate the acquiring resources and the conduct procurement?
Okay. So almost related, sir, as what I have explained earlier. So they are related tasks. Acquiring resources is two: human resource and equipment or material resources. But definitely the procurement is only focused on on the material, those that we have decided to buy. So the acquisition of resources dealing with two, acquiring is only the material. So if we need to buy, this is the actual buying. Need to buy, actual buying. So that's the simplest explanation of this, Sir Richard.
Okay. Got it, sir. Okay. May mga tanong pa kayo, mga mga kasama para parang walang nagtatanong, sir. Maganda ata ang tanong, sir.
Ayun. Okay lang kasi may references na tayong ibibigay. Then ang next meeting natin is with workshop na. So hopefully more interactive na tayo next meeting. I just want to cover this one kasi again, we will not be covering everything in our workshop or this series. So it's good to know na rin na na-cover mo yan kahit paano. May idea na tayo. Actually, it really helps. When I started studying this one 2 years, 3 years ago, it's quite difficult to really only memorize the table because you don't know where this enters. So this is one way that I feel, or I personally, in my side, I prove it more effective to visualize and to internalize the processes while I memorize. Then later on, we're going to put the details because these are just processes, and the explanation I made are just covering the layer. So each of these processes have their own documents to prepare. So again, we're going to have the ITTO, the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs of each process. So yun, kaya I opted to have this one presented as early as now. So yun. Hopefully na appreciate naman ng mga participants. Then later again, we're going to have a different kind of presentation and group works next meeting.
Oo nga eh.
Because next meeting may presentation na with slides. So you need to present your slides the way you understand the activity.